it's a myth that you can have it all. You can have it all when your mindset allows you to say that this is it all. You can have it all when you're having the things that you're choosing to have. Have it all can be completely redefined, and it doesn't have to be having the career and the kids and the house. Having it all is having whatever you feel the right amount is for you in that moment.
Hello and welcome to Nourish. My name is Kasha and I'm a holistic counselor and first-year doctoral student studying acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine. My mission with this podcast is to share the stories of inspiring humans who have discovered that elusive state of balance between the Western concept of success with more Eastern philosophies of inner knowing and spirituality. Think yin and yang and flow. Now, these two do not need to be separate, but I know firsthand how difficult it can be to reconcile them. As a Silicon Valley burnout SKP myself, teaser, I left the tech world after 10 years of a thriving career in product management. I want to share the stories that I wish I had heard when I was struggling to find that balance and flow myself. My hope is that these interviews can inspire you to rethink your own approach to mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. And if you are struggling, find your way back to authentic alignment. So, sit back, relax, and ground yourself back home, my love. Now let's get started. Hello, loves. Welcome to Nourish. I am so deeply honored to welcome my next guest, Ariel Garten. Ariel is a neuroscientist, mom, former psychotherapist, former fashion designer, and the co-founder and visionary behind the revolutionary health tech startup Muse. Muse tracks your brain activity as you meditate to give you real-time feedback, while also guiding you into the zone and solving the problem most of us have when starting a meditation practice, which is telling us when we're doing it right. Muse is now used by hundreds of thousands of people to start or deepen their meditation practice, including by the Mayo Clinic. Ariel spoke to some incredible research studies they've put together. The new second-generation Muse S uses advanced EEG technology to track how well you focus, sleep, and recharge. It's dubbed the digital sleeping pill because it presents the latest in non-pharmaceutical sleep support, providing immediate and intelligence assistance with falling asleep and nighttime interruptions. Despite having no formal business background, Ariel personally raised $18 million to found Muse from Silicon Valley investors, including Ashton Kutcher. And Ariel and Muse have been featured in over 1,000 articles across news stations like CNN, Forbes, Fortune, New York Times. I mean, just to name a few. You have to check out the full bio. Ariel's mission in life is to help people understand how their brain and mind work, both the nuts and bolts and the neurons, and how that plays out in the messy and beautiful human experience of living. She inspires people to understand that they can accomplish anything they want by understanding what actually goes on in their own mind. So when Ariel and I scheduled time to record today's episode, I had a whole list of questions because, as you can tell, she is quite the fascinating guest. I had topics around neuroscience, how Muse works, and her background in psychology. That said, when Ariel joined the podcast, she was actually joined with her incredible new daughter, who was only a couple months old when the conversation that we had just completely pivoted. We still covered all the goodness around how Muse works, the science behind meditation and our psyche, topics like biohacking, imposter syndrome, but we also had a really raw and real discussion about motherhood and this major life transition, including Ariel's experience with postpartum and really the science of it. This conversation is raw, real, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Finally, before we jump into it, for all you meditators or meditators to be, Ariel generously provided my listeners with 10% off of any Muse product with the code POD10. So save that code or check out the show notes. And I know after this episode, you'll be rushing to check out Muse just the way I did. So without further ado, let's jump on into it and get started. Ariel, oh my gosh, it is such a pleasure to have you on the Nourish podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. It is an absolute pleasure to be here.
And teaser for the audience, but this is actually a 2-for-1 deal. I have a very special guest joining Ariel, and that is her beautiful baby girl of just 3 months, Artemis. So
Hi.
welcome, Artemis.
Did you hear that little that was
Oh yes. Yeah. She's very vocal. I love it. She has a lot to say.
Yeah, she does.
So, I mean, I am just so beyond impressed to have you on this call, witnessing kind of in real time this not just evolution of how business looks like as a new mother, things like podcast interviews and things that, typically are very rigid and bound, juggling both of those things, but also to just, see another woman that's able to do it. Quote, I guess not do it all, but do both.
Yeah. And to be very clear, the idea of do it all is ridiculous and its own kind of prison. So I've cut down on most of my duties to be on mat leave, and I continue to do podcasts because I love it and it inspires me while it inspires others. And it's something that is compatible with sharing my life at this moment in this cute little being.
And we're so grateful to have you be doing that. So to kick it off, a question that I love to ask each and every guest is, what are 3 words that you would use to describe yourself?
Inspired, creative, and joyful.
Oh, I love those. I was really curious to know which ones would come to mind, especially because you literally are juggling a child in your arms as you're talking about your passion for podcasting and your business. And so I love how those words were very unique to you as opposed to your greater identity now as like a businesswoman and a mother and all those other things that kind of fold into that.
Yeah. I mean, creative, literally when you have a child, you go through the most generative time of your life. There are different forms of creativity at different points. I remember with my first child, have grown up sort of being an artist and making stuff all the time. And after my first child, I was like, I haven't written a poem in days. Like, what am I going to do? It's like, hold on, you just created the greatest work of your entire life. Like, you're off the hook for at least a year, probably longer.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yep. What we're generating now is this little being, and we don't have to worry about all of the other stuff or all of the other feelings of things that we needed to do to feel accomplished or feel like we were putting something into the world.
So I have a whole bunch of questions, Ariel, dedicated to your business and Muse and mindfulness and, your work as a neuroscientist, as a former psychotherapist, former fashion designer, and really just like this perspective of you as a visionary. But before we even go there, I would love to hear a little bit about your perspective of shifting, or I guess balancing these 2 identities as a mother, but also all of these other really accomplished, like outwardly, impressive achievements, kind of balancing those 2 parts of yourself.
It's a good question. So with the second child, it's much easier now. With the first child, it was kind of startling in some ways because I went from, being on a plane, being a high-powered, leader of a company, doing all of these things that were so outward. And then you have a child, and here we have a year of maternity leave in Canada. Hallelujah.
Oh, that's nice.
But along with it comes, oh my God, my world has just gotten so small. And like everything else has stopped. And like, where was the me that I was? Am I still that person? And as along with it came all of the cherishing of the smallness and the intimacy and the stillness of those moments. But it's confusing initially. It's absolutely confusing to shift identities. And you're growing into, what you ultimately realize is a greater identity that encompasses all of it. But in that moment, it feels very either or, and you wonder where the rest of you went and if it'll ever come back again. Now with my second child, it's much easier. I understand that transition happens, and I look forward to that transition. I look forward to that break and this intimacy that I'm having now, and the smallness and this, knowing that I will return to the other self at some point if I choose to, and that other self is carried through me and with me. I heard something funny, which is you should always have your second child first. And it's so true. With the second child, you're so prepared. You know what's happening. You know the drill. The shock is gone, but the awe remains, which is so different than with the first, where it can be so alienating and so confusing, while at the same time it's supposed to be so beautiful, and you can stop and capture that beauty. But most of the time, you're just so underslept and so in shock that it's hard to understand what's going on in many cases.
And it's like, it's not just a mental transition, right? Like your time, who you are, how you show up in the world, but it's also such a physical transition. Like your body has literally created another human and has gone through a trauma. And then there's this expectation, there's even like a term for it, right? Like just bouncing back. And you mentioned it yourself, like doing it all. Like that is such a myth. I noticed you mentioned the term going back to your other self. And this is something I'm so curious about. And I know a lot of women that I know that are going through that transition of becoming mothers talk about all the time, which is, do you find yourself balancing both of these roles? Like you switch from one to the other? Or do you notice like a seamless transition between the two throughout your day? Like what ends up happening? Because I noticed you called it the other self, but like when you are at work or raising funds and, you know, your baby kicks when you're pregnant or you have to go breastfeed, you suddenly shift from this role of what we see in society of high powered, you know, all that good stuff into something that's really vulnerable and very physical and very real in the moment. So are you balancing the two? Or are you switching between the two? Like what ends up happening?
Well, certainly in this iteration of motherhood, I'm balancing. I'm currently breastfeeding as we're speaking. There's a sweet little baby nibbling at my nipple as I, give her wonderful, nourishing milk. And then she's kicking her feet because she needs it to come out the other end.
All the details. I love it.
All the details. Oh, I'm a mom. You could get much more graphic than that. It's amazing how once you become a parent, poop becomes like, a standard thing to talk about all the time. I think we're in a place where it's much more accepting. In my last pregnancy 6 years ago, I was really at a point where I thought the two worlds needed to be separate. I remember thinking, I was the CEO of the company at that time before I went off on maternity leave. And, we're a tech startup that's sold around the world and high powered. I raised $18 million until that point.
Wow.
And we had another round to do. Hi, sweetheart. Just get her back on the boob. We had another round to do upcoming. And I was like, I cannot be, and this was literally the phrase I used in my head, I can't be 8 months pregnant, standing in Silicon Valley, raising money. Like they'd never give me money. And 8 years ago, I guess now it's 7 years ago, my son's 6. That was really true. And in this pregnancy, because so much in the world has changed, both in terms of the recognition of women's rights and abilities to be in the workplace, the Me Too shift that's happened, the incredible support of women in technology and mentorship and funding to that degree, and the way the world has changed with the pandemic, I was literally 8 months pregnant, sitting in front of my computer on Zoom, literally pitching to Silicon Valley VCs and racing around. So we've raised around $10 million.
Congratulations.
Kind of closing right now as we speak. Thank you. And that's to expand into new programs and opportunities, including sleep and the application of meditation and multiple other domains in our life.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think this will be really inspiring for so many women, myself included, because there's just something that I feel like in society you're taught to almost like disconnect these two parts of yourself. But, if you're 8 months pregnant, you're sitting there, you have to raise $10 million, you're going to do it when you have a baby kicking inside about to be birthed or not. And I love and am so grateful for the women that are paving this new paradigm shift. So thank you for that.
But I also have to be like really clear at the same time that it's, oh, sweetheart. This is a brilliant example of what I'm about to say, that it is really hard to do both simultaneously. It can be really, really, really hard. And there should be no expectation. People were like, oh, do you want to be you'll be like Marissa Mayer, CEO and mom. And I was like, I don't want to be CEO and mom. That sounds terrible. I don't want to have to crib in my office like that. I want to have the luxury to choose to not do it all. I want to have the luxury to choose to not have to be 100% at work, to, go back to work part-time, to not have to live up to expectations of being a great mom and a great leader and a great business person. That's way too much. And I don't want to do it. And I don't want that pressure. So it's really been much more about taking one role and one thing at a time and savoring it and enjoying it and dealing with having less and but more at the same time, dealing with having less expectations, saying no, putting boundaries around work, and really just choosing the highest priority things and just doing those, because it's a myth that you can have it all. You can have it all when your mindset allows you to say that this is it all. You can have it all when you're having the things that you're choosing to have. Have it all can be completely redefined, and it doesn't have to be having the career and the kids and the house. Having it all is having whatever you feel the right amount is for you in that moment.
I needed to hear that. So, question for you. You're a very ambitious woman. What was it like? And I guess I'm assuming that there was this redefinition of what all was, because all and success and, kind of what the target is before kids probably looks very different than what it looks like after you have children, where your priorities shift. So what was that process of redefining what all was for you? And was there kind of a transition that had to take place internally to realign with that new definition of all?
These are great questions, and not stuff I've actually talked about before. So for me, I was, crazy ambitious and productive within that ambition. I'd gone through multiple different careers, had incredible drive, and really felt in my head like I could do it all. And frankly, most of the time did, like really, really pushed myself without it feeling like I was pushing. I was just like drawn to all these things and had boundless energy to do it. So, as I referenced before, this sense of stopping when I had a child, and it's not stopping because, having a kid is intensive work. You're underslept, you're changing diapers, you're attending to needs. If you have two, it's absolutely nonstop. If you've got two little ones, it's wild. But, in this very, very small way that can really feel in a lot of senses like underachieving, because like, what's another diaper? What's another feed? And so, the act of motherhood is in some ways giving yourself unconditionally to a little thing so that their survival is almost greater than yours in some way. And so you give selflessly.
Well, and also I think this is an example of being present.
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult transition. On one hand, you're giving yourself selflessly. On the other hand, you also have to create boundaries for the things that you need to do. It's like the baby is crying. She clearly needs me. However, I'm making dinner for both of us. So she just needs to cry for another minute and a half while I finish what I'm doing. And, she needs to be able to deal with that. And I need to be able to deal with that without not being perfect in that moment as a mother, not being able to do it all.
And what about the kind of identity transition or the thought process recognizing like, wow, all or success, it looks different now? Was it difficult to reconcile that with the old beliefs, the kind of slightly different goals that you had before having a child as they kind of shift and priorities shift as well?
Totally, 100%. For me, I'm really lucky that I feel like I really achieved where I needed to be in my career before having a child, and sort of, achieve a lot of impact in the world before having a child. So there was less pressure to continue to do that once I had the baby, the first one. But at the same time, there's still those narratives of like, oh, how do I keep moving my life forward, my contribution to the world forward, all of these things, while there's this little baby that needs me. And it's really hard. There is a loss of self that happens in it, and then a transition of self to something bigger and something greater when you recognize how much your capabilities have expanded because of this experience of mothering and child rearing, how much your knowledge has expanded, your wisdom, your sensitivity to people, because you become more sensitive to this little being. Your brain actually changes in such a way to make you more forgetful, the quote unquote mommy brain, which by the way is a real phenomenon that happens in your brain. And at the same time makes you much more sensitive to people and their responses and their thoughts and, then their feelings and their cues, because you have to be for your little baby. So there's a transition that you can't describe and that's like no other, but that can be really alienating and upsetting. It was to a degree for me, and certainly is for a lot of other people. And for me, I had postpartum depression. Yeah. So,
Wow.
I'm a trained mental health professional and I had postpartum depression and didn't immediately realize what it was. And so, on the one hand, I had the bliss of post-pregnancy, of having this little baby, of like, the amazement of this beautiful little creature. On the other hand, I had all these crazy thoughts in my head that like were just crazy because I had postpartum depression.
This was with your first child?
With my first child. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I was able to, with this one, avoid it. I had, knowing that could be coming, I had a lot of mental health support. And with now 6 years more of a meditation practice under my belt, have a much better understanding of the thoughts in my head and how to just let them slide by without getting engaged with them, and the emotions that arise with, just allowing them to slide by without getting engaged. And, there was, with this one, I had a few periods, very short periods, where I was unbelievably sad for no reason. And I could feel myself beginning to create the justifications for why, clearly because I'm, my husband is upset at me, or because, this is so hard, or like whatever, none of which were true. I could start to just feel those tendencies arise, and I could just stop and say, it's not because of anything. It's because of a chemical shift that is just producing a feeling of sadness in you right now. And you can go and ascribe it to whatever you want and make big stories about it and, make it worse and over dramatize. Or you can just sit there and experience the feeling of sadness, know it's a chemical experience, be curious about it, observe it, be possibly grateful for it because it gives you a different perspective for a few minutes, and let it pass. And it did.
Oof. I love that you brought this up, because I feel like in the space of mental health, and you're former psychotherapist and neuroscientist, so I would love to hear your perspective on kind of this notion of, do you get to the root cause of the emotions to release them? Or do you kind of witness them as you describe? And I know that a lot of people are going through not just postpartum. Postpartum is like one example, but let's say traumatic experiences that bring up triggers. And hearing you kind of explain how you witness these emotions and attributed them to a chemical response and could allow them to pass, is that the best method for handling these types of difficult scenarios from, I guess, your personal and professional perspective?
Great question. And I want to begin by saying that, I got lucky and was able to transform my postpartum depression in this way. But, for a lot of women, simply observing their sadness is not going to get them out of postpartum depression. And, things like Zoloft can be really helpful, regularly seeing your mental health professional. If you feel like you went into pregnancy or you went into your motherhood experience, like as somebody who has anxiety or depression, like make sure you find a mental health resource. Usually your OBG or OBGYN or your hospital or your midwife clinic will have one, and start working with them early and like understand what might be coming so that you can gain the tools and skills that you need, which may be medication, which, maybe regular therapy, maybe CBT. It certainly probably includes a meditation practice so that you can be prepared with the tools that you need. Oh, and a ton of support in the house and good sleep. Also key things to support. Yeah.
Things a mother doesn't have: sleep.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to your question about how you manage trauma, is it a question of, digging back into the feelings and processing them, or witnessing them and allowing them to pass? It's a combination of the two. So when we have trauma, we have a re-triggered experience from experience that happened to us in the past, where your body and emotional self retains the memory of the discomfort and will replay it very, very quickly based on any trigger that may be associated with that trauma. So there's two ways to confront trauma, and both are useful simultaneously. One is by doing methods that actually help you to safely go back to the time of trauma and reanalyze it and reintegrate it. Because one theory of trauma is that it basically is an experience that is outside of your timeline of self, outside of your standard memory system and narrative. And so it needs to be reintegrated properly in order to dissipate the charge that's in it. So a lot of trauma methodologies involve going back to the time of the trauma with a therapist while doing tapping, which can essentially, it can do many things. One of the most obvious things it does is it simply distracts your body and mind while you experience the memory, so it's not as intense. And you continue to experience and re-experience this memory in safe ways that are not intense until it becomes engaged into your narrative of self. Now, if we go and we try to re-experience these memories without a trained professional and a methodology associated with it, we're just going to, feel the trauma spike every time. So there needs to be a methodology that allows you to disconnect the emotional experience of it from the memory so that you can re-understand and reintegrate. And the second part of it, and anybody can do this at any time, no professional required, is when you have the sensations of the trauma arise. For me, I had a trauma that left me with the feeling sometimes of like being grabbed. I just feel this feeling around the sides of me and like somebody was grabbing towards me. And I would feel that feeling arise of like being grabbed. I would hunch in my shoulders. I'd have a spike of fear. And in the past, prior to really understanding what to do with that, I would just feel that fear. It would be really intense. I believed that there was something wrong because I felt that fear. It would, re-trigger the event, and the whole thing would just be reinforcing and heightening to the fear of that experience and re-traumatizing. When I really learned that I was safe in this moment and that what I was feeling was just, a rise in biological response that actually is a little bit broken, a biological response that doesn't actually relate to anything happening here and now, but was just a bunch of systems firing and attempting to protect me from something it no longer needs to protect me from, and maybe actually never needed to protect me from. Then I could observe the feeling coming in, my shoulders hunching forward, the feeling of, fear rising from my stomach through my chest, and just be there and observe them and not give them a story, not give them credence. You can give them respect, but not give them credence that they mean anything, and just say, you're part of something old, and I actually don't think you're serving me anymore. This sensation doesn't help or serve me. This trauma response isn't helping or serving me, and I know you're just the vestiges of something from the past. It's a flywheel. It's like a water wheel that's going and spinning, and water's coming off of it. And when you stop putting energy into it, it'll slow down, but there's still going to be some residual spin. There's still going to be some residual water spilling off of it. So it's like, I don't have to keep putting energy into this wheel spinning forward and forward and forward. I can say, hey, this is actually not useful. I can observe it, and I can know that this is just some neural firing that's no longer useful. And as I recognize that, and I didn't get caught up in the story, and I didn't get caught up in the fear of it, and I didn't get caught up in feeling like there was a reason I was reliving that trauma, I could just be like, you are old and you can slowly just go away. And it did. And it took me not getting hooked into it. Mm-hmm. And again, that's the meditation practice. That's the practice of observing the sensations and the thoughts and the feelings that you have and saying, your sensations and thoughts and feelings, and I can choose to engage with you or not. I can just see you as something that is happening, that will rise, that will fall, that I don't have to put an old story to.
That's a beautiful analogy. And this idea of both reprogramming and witnessing, it just sounds like the complete picture. I'm curious, since you are an avid meditator, you brought it up several times during this conversation alone, and obviously you're the founder and chief evangelist officer of a health tech startup that really kind of integrates pieces of meditation through its brain sensing technology. What exactly happens in the brain when someone is meditating?
Oh, sure. So let's start by talking about what happens in the brain when you are afraid. And that's,
Oh, yeah.
there is this, yeah, when you're in stress, fight or flight. So there's this awesome little part of your brain called the amygdala. It is in the middle of your head, and its job is to scan for danger and to fire when it sees something that it perceives is dangerous. So that could be real danger, or that could just be the perception of danger, or the concern that there might be danger, like a stain on your pants when you're going into a date, or or an email from your boss where you're like, oh, what's it going to say? And it's actually fine, but because it's an email from your boss, you just fire every time because your amygdala is like, oh, that thing's going to be scary. So our amygdala responds, and particularly in cases of anxiety, it is over responding all of the time. In its response is creating stressful thoughts about the thing and stressful sensations in your body, those sensations of fear, heart pounding, fight or flight. Now, in a meditation practice, you are doing a very simple exercise where you're focusing on your breath. Your mind wanders into a thought. You choose not to follow that thought, and you come back to your breath. When you do that, you are breathing deeply. So you're bringing your body out of fight or flight and into rest and digest. Your vagus nerve is being triggered to increase its vagal tone. It's releasing the pressure in many senses in your body. It's lowering your blood pressure, dilating your blood vessels, slowing your heart rate. And at the same time, you're doing a mental exercise that is strengthening your prefrontal cortex. So that's the logical part of your mind, the kind of wise self, the organization and planning part of your mind, the attention, the inhibition part of your mind. And your prefrontal cortex is actually learning how to better quiet your amygdala. So in long-term meditators, you can see, if you put them into a brain scan, you may see a decrease in the activity of the amygdala, so less fight or flight. And in some long-term meditators, you can even see a decrease in the volume, the size of the amygdala. So this part of your brain is getting less and less reactive over time.
Oh, wow. All right. I mean, I already meditate, but you definitely sold it to me again. I feel like this is like a nice little ad for meditation for sure. So, does it make a difference the type of meditation, how long you meditate for? Because there are so many different styles, philosophies out there. What's your perspective on that?
So, yes, there are many different forms of meditation. The form that is sort of core that most people start with is focused attention meditation. And that's where you're focusing your attention on an object. Typically, it's your breath because your breath is always there, but it could be a candle or a mantra, a word, a phrase. You focus your attention, your mind wanders away from it, you notice, but then you choose to return to your mantra rather than bringing your attention back to it, or return back to your breath. So that's where most people start, and that's what we do in Muse Mind Meditation. And most studies show that meditating in such a way for, let's say, 20 minutes can bring a host of benefits like improved attention, decreased stress, improved physiological function, and more. In the studies that we've done with Muse, we've looked at meditating for 10 minutes a day with focused attention meditation over 6 weeks, and that has led to improvement in speed of processing, as demonstrated by the Stroop task, in decrease in stress and improvement in relaxation. In other studies with Muse, they've looked at using it from 10 to 20 minutes per day, and that has shown benefits in heart rate and more. And in one study, there's actually a study at the Mayo Clinic looking at patients with breast cancer using Muse to help them through the cancer care process. And there they started just at 3 minutes a day, and they were able to see improvements in their stress, and their fatigue, and their quality of life. So, the answer to the question that most people have, which is, how long should I meditate for each day? The answer varies, and the answer start with the right time for you. Start with just 3 minutes a day, if that's all you can handle. And the women in the breast cancer study invariably went up from then, but The only ask was to do 3 minutes. And then they would continue on as they felt capable or able. And that amount of time increased over time. So if you can, get to 10 minutes per day each day, that's amazing. 15, that's awesome. 10 minutes someday, 15 others, great. 20 minutes, you're rocking. Don't feel bad if you don't get there. The key is to make it consistent. And then the key is to bring the learnings into your everyday experience. So while you're meditating, you're learning to observe your mind and your body. And then as you go out into the real world, you're learning to apply that knowledge to notice, like when your shoulders are a little bit tense, to take some deep breaths and relax them. When you feel your breathing increasing because you're stressed, it's just like take a few minutes. When you notice thoughts in your head that are not helping or serving you, to say, hey, whoa, I don't need those right now. And use the same practice to let them slide by. And they'll come back again and again and again. And you continue to use that practice that you've learned to let them slide away, knowing that you don't need to get hooked in on them. And knowing that in your meditation, you've practiced the skill of letting go of your thought and moving your attention on to something else. And in the real world, you can do that. You can be talking to somebody, have a bunch of thoughts that come up that aren't helpful in that moment or taking you away from the conversation. Choose to let those go and come on back to the person you're talking to. Even the fact that you can notice that your mind has become distracted. That is a huge part of the training of meditation. And when you go out into the real world, you can be, typing a document and then start thinking about Facebook or donuts and actually notice that you're doing that rather than just doing it. And then be like, oh, right, that's a distraction. Back to task. So we have the practice on the mat for however long works for you. And then the practice in real life of the applications of the meditation skill.
I love that. I love the flexibility as well. I think, meditation and really emphasizing consistency. I think that's like a word that you just mentioned that really stood out to me. Progress over perfection will definitely lead to kind of that cumulative effect over time, hopefully, right?
Yes. And another important part of that, you bring up the word perfection, which for hyperachieving women is a really key term. And part of what you learn in meditation is non-judgment. And actually the first step of non-judgment in meditation is that it's okay to not be good at meditation. It's okay to sit down and have a whole bunch of thoughts, because we all do, and feel it's kind of jumbled in your brain and not really know what you're supposed to do, and to just do it for a few minutes and then get up and not judge yourself for that and not feel like you weren't good at it. It's okay. You were great. You sat down. That's all you needed to do. And just come back day after day and practice the experience of not being judgmental about when your mind is wandering, about how good you're doing at your meditation. And this sense of non-judgment becomes an incredibly key skill that we learn in meditation. Non-judgment, both for ourselves and for the world.
That's beautiful. So for a lot of people who are just starting out with meditation, a question that comes up frequently is, how do I know if I'm doing it, quote, right? Right? Not just like perfection, but how do you know that you're tapping into that meditative state if your mind is wandering and you're just struggling to focus? Is there kind of a signal or a sign, or is it completely elusive? How do you know that you're meditating correctly?
Excited here. It's like, that's why we made Muse, because so many people struggle with that question. It's like, what on earth is going on in my mind and what's supposed to be going on? And there are many different forms of meditation and many different aims and ends to to those different meditations. The meditation that we teach core to Muse is focused attention meditation. And there, the initial goal is to be able to have stable, single-pointed attention on something like your breath, for your mind to wander, because your mind always does, to notice that your mind has wandered, let go of that, and come on back to your breath. And so what we did in Muse was we created a neurofeedback experience. So you're wearing a slim little headband that's tracking your brain waves, and it's translating your brain activity into guiding sounds so that you know when you're in stable attention on your breath. And then as your mind wanders onto a thought, you hear the sounds pick up. It sounds like it's starting to rain and a little thunderstorm's brewing. That's your cue to then let go of that thought, bring your attention back to your breath. And then the storm quiets. And as you're able to sit longer and longer with your breath, you hear the reinforcing sound of little cheeping birds, tweeting birds that let you know that, like, yep, you're there. It's all good. Yep, you're there. And so There have been, 400,000 or more people who've used Muse to either start their meditation practice from scratch, like, I have no idea what to do. And, a doctor or friend is like, here, try this. And I've actually now met meditation teachers who, when I ask them, how did you start your practice? They're like, using Muse. It's happened more than once.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, we've been in market now for 7 years or 8 years. So, it's been enough time for a generation of people to get on the wagon. And then once they learn it, go off and do their own thing. And it's also, I've heard from lots of expert meditators about how having this really mirror into your mind enhances the experience of meditation, because you can now have a new view into yourself and a new way to observe what your mind is doing and learn from it.
And I just want to reflect how exciting it is to have a piece of technology that is actually helping us connect to ourselves. Because so frequently technology actually kind of takes away from that experience. And that's something that I know a lot of folks in the tech world, at least myself as a meditator, I find myself guilty about that because I'm also from the tech space, creating these products that in a way aren't really helping. But it's incredible to not just hear about the impact that Muse can have on, like an individual level, but some of the research that's coming out of this. I mean, that's so exciting. It must be so rewarding as well.
Oh, it's totally amazing. So now we have over 200 papers using Muse, scientific journal articles.
Wow.
Like, third party had nothing to do with us. And a lot of them are in the healthcare space. Like Mayo Clinic is now running 5 other studies using Muse. So as somebody who actually doesn't love technology, who appreciates the benefits that it can bring to our lives, as I'm looking at you over, a host of technology tools, taking my voice and transmitting it into the airwaves, editing it, doing all of the things. Technology is not a bad thing, but technology is only helpful insofar as in service of humanity. And when it stops being in service of our best selves, like connection with others, improving the efficiencies in our lives, making us better people, should really just stop doing what it's doing. So it's, initially it really was a struggle because I hated technology in many ways. I was frustrated by technology, but amazing to be able to create a tool that is designed to help you learn a skill, to get in touch with yourself, to, like a telescope or a microscope, allow you to see further than you would with your own eyes, and then take that knowledge and put the technology aside and, like a fisherman, have a greater set of skills yourself that you can then apply without the technology within your daily life.
I so appreciate that perspective. And I think a lot of folks listening to this, especially those who work in the tech world, maybe are entrepreneurs trying to figure out their next idea, I think that's such a valuable checklist to go through before pursuing, the next thing that they're creating. Like, just to be aware of how is this going to affect society at like a greater scale. So thank you. I could honestly speak with you forever, but I want to be mindful of your time. So if you could share with us, where can people find you? What are some of the exciting things that you might want to, share with the audience, with the world that you have coming up? I mean, I know you're actually still on maternity leave, so that's probably one very exciting thing and like a message for everybody to enjoy that if they're in that place. But yeah, what would you like to share with the audience and where can everyone find you?
Sure. Well, the first thing I want to share is Artemis fell asleep halfway through the interview. So after the feeding and the burping, she's now been gently asleep. Yeah, she's been gently asleep for half an hour. That's why you haven't heard from her. That's why I was able to give my full attention to the podcast now. In terms of where to find me, you can find me and Muse at all of the socials at Choose Muse, at Choose Muse, ChooseMuse. My own Instagram is Ariel's Musings, and Muse can be found at choosemuse.com, ChooseMuse.com. In terms of what's coming up, so we've always been thinking about ways to apply this skill of meditation in various different domains. So, with Muse, we started first with mind meditation, the focused attention meditation that teaches you the skill. We've expanded into brain, heart, breath, and body. So we have sensors that track your heart, that track your breath, that track your movement, to give you heart meditations, different breathing exercises, and to help you find stillness. we have an ever-expanding collection of guided meditations, which are very interesting to me because, we're always thinking about the new avenues where we can provide content and guidance to help somebody in that moment of their life. Like, what is it that you need in this moment when you're terrified from the pandemic? So, I was involved in creating a set of meditations specifically for the moment the pandemic hit. What do you need when you're in a frustrating relationship? What do you need as a mother? What are the things that you need in this moment? And now we're expanding that into sleep. So sleep is an area that I've been diving very, very deeply into and creating tools and technologies to help you fall asleep and fall back asleep. The next realm after that is dreaming, and we started to experiment there. Yeah.
Ooh, that sounds so exciting. Oh my gosh.
I built a beautiful program for pain, applying mindfulness for pain, which is now being tested at the Mayo Clinic. So that's something that will be coming out in the future, and really understanding how we create pathways, because it's easy to say just meditate, and then you meditate and maybe you don't do it the next day and you fall on and off the wagon. But when you're able to create a program or a pathway for somebody to really get to where they want in their life, it's like, I want to have this outcome. I need some help with it. How do I get on the bandwagon, apply meditation, and make it actually work for me in this particular way? Then it becomes a very, very powerful tool. So I'm excitedly working on that. So all of that is, in the fun Muse universe.
Oh my gosh, I cannot wait. The dreaming, that sounds so exciting. And also the neural pathway side of things, talking about that reprogramming aspect, I think that's going to be huge. Ooh, that's so exciting. Well, Ariel, thank you so, so much. Ariel and Artemis, thank you for joining me here to have this conversation on the Nourish podcast. It was such a pleasure to speak with you both. And yeah, thanks to everyone for tuning in. Have an incredible week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Nourish. If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave a positive review. Your rating really helps the podcast grow, and your feedback means the world to me. I publish new episodes twice a month, so hit the subscribe button to be notified. Finally, if you'd like to learn more about the work I do as a holistic counselor or to connect, please head over to my website or my Instagram at Mira_wellness_co. I love speaking with each and every one of you. Thanks again for being a listener, and see you next time.